Hey everybody. So I am going to do a new series that focuses on The Walking Dead. I really enjoyed The Walking Dead. I first came across it because my stepdad really enjoyed it. And he watched, I don't know, 3 or 4 seasons and he'd tell me about it. And I'm like, it's just a zombie show. Who cares about some zombie show? So, like I said, 3 or 4 seasons into it, I decided to pull it up on Netflix and see what's the hubbub. Why are people so excited about it? And so it didn't take long, and I found myself like in season 2, then season 3, then season 4. I binged it hard, and I was all into it. So my stepdad and I would talk about it all the time. And he was more into it than I was at the time. He was finding out about the comic books and what Kirkman was saying, and he would read all the comments and then the articles online and stuff like that. And I was just like, the show's pretty cool. And then the more he talked about it, the more excited I got about it. And so eventually I'm like, I think I need to start getting some of his comic books, because he's like, yeah, the comic book did this, but the show did this. I'm like, what? What's going on there? And they're like, oh, well, these characters in the show, they're not even in the comic books. I'm like, what? That's crazy. So I had to find out what the discrepancies were. And turns out I like this comic books more than I like the show. Although there are some characters in the show that I like a lot that aren't in the comic books. But it made me nerd out even harder. So I went to my LCS and I started picking up books. Unfortunately, by that point, it was already like, I don't know, somewhere around issue 90. So I missed quite a few. Unfortunately, I wish I started picking up earlier. It would have been so nice. Now those books are really expensive. But I have a pretty decent run. What I would do is I go to my LCS and I had a pull list, and I'd pull 2 of everything, or at least 2 of each copy, not all the variants. But I would do one for myself, and I'd give one to my stepdad. And then we could talk about the show and the comic book, and that was a lot of fun. And so even when he and my mom moved to Vegas for a while, I would stockpile the comics, and when I saw them, I would just give them a big old handful and say, okay, read these. You're going to like that, or whatever. And it just gave us stuff to talk about. It was fun nerding out with them. I lost them a few months ago, and I miss them a lot. And I thought that it would be fun to try to complete my run. Since the run is over, it's going to be hard to get the older ones. They're going to be a little pricey, but I think that's going to be my new objective, just to try to complete that whole run. And I thought, you know what? I bet a lot of people who dig the show don't know that the book is a whole lot different. There are obviously some similarities. They're not completely different. It's like they're intertwined, and they kind of go in and out. But I thought it would be fun to go back and read my old books while I'm trying to build the run slowly, and also do kind of a recap, because I love the show too, and tell you all what's going on in the book and what's going on in the show about the same time. So if you dig this, I plan on making it a series. And if this isn't your jam, that's cool. I will tell you that, huge spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil it hard. I'm going to spoil the book and the show at the same time. It's a double spoiler. So if you were planning somehow on, this weekend going back and picking up 20-year-old comic books, and this is gonna ruin everything for you, then please don't watch this. But chances are, if you were gonna pick up the book or start the series, you would have done it already. So I don't feel bad about spoiling it. So that's it. I hope you enjoy it. Please comment below if you do dig it, because if you don't dig it, I'm not gonna spend the time to do the edit machine, because it takes a little bit to do these. But I hope you do, and take care, y'all. And The Walking Dead, it's awesome. Go watch it. In my collection, I have 2 of the 15-year anniversary reprints of issue 1 of The Walking Dead. They made quite a few of them. I guess they were like, hey, you know what? We need to print some money. So they just decided to reprint the first one, and they made all these little variants. based off large sellers. I have two of them. Like I said, I have one that's Hall of Justice and one that is Comic Traders. The difference is the images that they use in the shattered glass on the cover, and actually on the back they have different logos on the bottom left corner. So that's the only difference. The story on the inside is all the same. So let's look at season 1, episode 1 of the show compared to the very first issue. In season 1, episode 1 of the show, Rick drives up in his cop car and he walks past overturned cars and evidence of chaos to go to a gas station and fill up his squad car. There are dead bodies in cars and no signs of life until he comes across a little girl walker still in her bunny slippers and robe. Rick is surprised because he thought she was alive until she turned around, and he pulls out his revolver and he puts her down. He wasn't surprised by the little girl, though, which is surprising. Then he goes on his day, and the next scene, he and his deputy, which is Shane Walsh, having burgers in the car and just chatting about women. They get a call about a shooting or a robbery. They go to the scene. They put down some road spikes because it's a highway chase to catch the getaway car. And Rick ends up getting shot during the shootout. Then he ends up in a coma and he wakes up in the hospital. Issue 1 starts off with Rick in the hospital. None of that backstory. And here, the show and the books are pretty similar. Rick wakes up and the lights in the hospital and the equipment are all off. He calls for the nurse and there's no answer, and then he falls out of bed because his legs have atrophied, but he's still able to ambulate but with pain. In the show, he opens the door and there's a bed blocking the door, but he moves it out of the way. I only mention that because there's a flashback in the future that explains this. In the comic book, the bed isn't there at all. In the show, Rick walks up to the nurse's station and tries to use the phone, but nothing happens. He sees some matches and he lights one of them and he sees if he can see anything around on the desk to help. And then he walks down the hall and he sees a corpse of a woman who's been eaten just laying in the hallway, and the lights are all flickering and stuff. In the comic, Rick goes to use the elevator. He gets in the elevator, the door closes, and when it opens, a corpse falls into the elevator. There's no reasoning for why there is no power in the hospital, but the elevator works somehow. And then there's the classic scene in the show. Rick follows the hall to the cafeteria. Everything is all blown up. There's bullet holes. The wires are coming out of the ceiling. The lights are flickering. He gets to the cafeteria doors, and then he sees that they're chained shut. And then there are the words, "Don't open, dead inside." And then the walkers inside start banging against the doors, trying to get out. And then you see like the long, skinny fingers protruding through the cracks of the doors, trying to figure out how to get to Rick. It's awesome. And in the show, at that point, Rick tries to use the elevator and it's not working in the show, so he goes to the fire exit. The stairwell is pitch black. He uses the matches that he found at the nurse's station earlier and slowly walks down the exit into the blinding light of the new world, only to reveal dozens of dead bodies wrapped in sheets laying outside of the hospital. There's a hill outside the hospital, and he walks up the hill only to reveal an abandoned military base camp. And he keeps on walking, and then he comes across an abandoned bicycle laying next to a walker. Now in the comic book, Rick goes to the cafeteria, no words of warning on the door, but there's a 2x4 through the handles. The show has a 2x4 and chains. In the comic, he takes out the 2x4. He opens the cafeteria doors to find it filled with walkers. One lunges at him, and they both fall into the stairwell. They fall down the stairs, and the walker's head literally snaps off as they're falling down. Rick opens the fire exit, and then he uses his belt to tie the door shut behind him. Rick finds himself in the parking garage, but the only car that's there is locked. So he leaves on foot until he finds an abandoned bicycle lying next to the walker. The same as in the show, that part. In the comic book, he's wearing jeans and he's back in his normal clothes, but in the show, he's still wearing his hospital gown. In both the show and the comic, he takes the bike, rides to his house looking for his wife and son, who are Lori and Carl, but the house is abandoned. He leaves the house, and then he gets hit in the head with a shovel. In the comic, that hit knocks him completely out and he wakes up on the couch. In the show, he's questioned by Morgan Jones, who is trying to figure out if he's a walker or if he is somewhere in the process of turning into one. And then before he can really answer, Rick passes out and then he wakes up on the couch. In both the comic and the show, Morgan fills Rick in on what's been going on in the world since Rick has been in the hospital. There's a lot more dialogue in the show, but the gist of it is that Rick finds out that walkers are everywhere, and now they try to eat you, and if they bite you, they'll kill you. In the show, then you have the heartbreaking scene where Morgan's son, Dwayne, sees his mom, who's a walker now, walking around the street at night, and then tries to get into the house to get to them. That wasn't in the comic at all. Also in the show, they go back to Rick's house the next day, where he determines that his family is still alive because all the family photos are gone. In the comic, it actually shows the family photos on the wall when Rick goes there after leaving the hospital, and Rick doesn't return to the house a second time. In both the show and the comic, the group goes to the police station, but in the show they take a hot shower, and you see Morgan and Dwayne elated to be taking a hot shower. Clearly they hadn't taken one in a long time. Morgan tells Rick that there's a radio program that claims Atlanta is a safe zone. In the show, he tells Rick about that in the police station, but in the comic, Morgan tells Rick while they're still at the house. In the show and in the comic, the group goes to the gun locker at the station and gets loaded up. And after loading up with ammo and weapons, everybody leaves and they're going to go their separate ways. Morgan and his son are going to stick around for a little while, and Rick's going to head off to Atlanta. But in the show, Rick hands Morgan a walkie-talkie, and to conserve battery, they agree to turn it on at a specific point every day to talk to each other, to just keep tabs on each other to make sure everything's okay, because Morgan is supposed to meet Rick in Atlanta. That doesn't happen in the comic book. In both the show and the comic book, they are approached by a walker that's on the other side of the security gate that connects to the police station. In the show, it's a deputy that Rick didn't really care for, but Rick shoots him in the head because he just can't leave him that way. In the comic book, it's just some random walker, and Rick is gonna shoot him. Morgan tells him not to because of the sound, and Rick just leaves him. In both the show and the comic, Rick goes back to where he got the bike earlier after he left the hospital and finds that same walker that scared him earlier, and then he shoots her out of an act of mercy. And that's where the comic ends. The show veers off and gives more detail about what happens with Morgan and his story, and then some more about Rick and his journey to Atlanta, and then they introduce some more characters. That probably happens in the second issue of the comic book series, but I don't have that one, so I'm not sure. All right, so that's it for my comparison to the first book in the series and the first episode in that pop culture phenomenon that is The Walking Dead. I hope you enjoyed it, and y'all take care. I appreciate your time. Bye, y'all. Sorry, post-credit scene. You know what's always driven me crazy about the very first episode of The Walking Dead? Rick, the very first scene, has no issue seeing the world crazy, going down to get his gas, seeing our little bunny rabbit zombie girl, and then putting her down. But when he wakes up in the hospital, he's freaking out. Like, I have no idea what's going on. And then he sees the walkers, and he's like, what's going on? Are they alive? Are they alive? Or are they dead? What's going on? I don't understand. Why? Why were you okay at the very beginning with shooting a walker, a little girl walker in the head, and 3 minutes later, you're waking up from a coma, and you're like, I have no idea what's going on in the world. I don't get it. Also, right after that scene, he's in the car with Shane. They're eating hamburgers that look like they're fast food hamburgers. They're complaining about their wives and significant others, like the world is normal. And I don't know. I just feel like the very opening scene, although it was awesome, doesn't really jive when it jumps right back into the story. You're just left with wondering, almost like, was that reality? And then there's some kind of like flashback or something. It doesn't work in the timeline for me. Anyway, that's my thought.